Right now, inshallah, we will be continuing what we have been doing for quite a while now. And of course, certainly, we were working and still working on Surah Nisa. And certainly, Surah Nisa, we last left off at this ayah right here, and we went in details. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ تَابُوا وَأَصْلَحُوا وَاعْتَصَمُوا بِاللَّهِ وَأَخْلَصُوا دِينَهُمْ لله فأولئك مع المؤمنين. And of course, certainly, this basically is laying out the exception that those that had repented, those that had lived the piety and embraced piety, and certainly were consistent in being steadfast and were living with the sincerity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or to the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then those are the people that will be ma'al mu'mineen. So when we say فَأُولَئِكَ مَعَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, whether فَأُولَئِكَ مَعَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ to mean on Judgment Day, or فَأُولَئِكَ مَعَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ that they would be with the believers even in this life. So in other words, they embrace a certain environment, they put themselves within a certain category, and in order to be within that category, so what does a mu'min really embrace? Well, a mu'min really embraces one, tawbah, two, piety, consistency in where their words, the principle that they embrace, which is, of course, in their vision in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and certainly the words that they practice in their life, in their behavior. It's basically based upon the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَاعْتَصَمُوا بِاللَّهِ. الاعتصام basically means to connect, to hold on to, and this is definitely more of a metaphorical wording, in where it is al-i'tisam, in where yes, you're holding on to something, but this is to hold on to the word, meaning to stay in conviction and to stay committed to the word. وَأَخْلَصُوا دِينَهُمْ لِلَّهِ, because it is not enough to put in a practice based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but there must be with it coming in absolutely that part about sincerity. فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَعَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, in where they would engage with the believers and of course put themselves within that category, and at the same time وَسَوْفَ يُؤْتِ اللَّهُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَجْرًا عَظِيمًا. And just as every time, there's a pattern in where it would lay out the good behavior with, of course, the reward for it, and certainly whenever there is a wrong behavior slash sin, then there would be the punishment for it. All right. ما يفعل الله بعذابكم إن شكرتم وآمنتم وكان الله شاكرا عليما. When you look at this ayah, ما يفعل الله بعذابكم, what would this is right there? Let's look at this one. Here he said استفهام بمعنى التقرير. What does that actually mean? So this isn't a question per se. This isn't giving you a question, but this is laying out an informative clause. So right there, in where yes, it's telling you what would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do if he were to actually punish you. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not benefit anything from punishing those that had committed the sin, and certainly he would not benefit either in his authority, in his power, he would not benefit from having people actually obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the Lord Almighty had created them. And certainly, as in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that even if the last and even if the first were at the heart and the most and the highest conviction of the best believer, whether from the ins and the jinn, even if everyone from the ins, from the humans and the jinn were at the highest level of conviction, highest level of faith, that would not increase in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. Same thing. If the the whole mankind, and even when we're speaking about jinn as well, even if they were at the level of sinning as the worst sinner on earth, or the worst sinner ever to exist, that would not decrease from the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, so that's why the ayah is basically saying right there, and where it is a question in the form of an informative clause. أي منفعة له في عذابكم إن شكرتم. So at the end, that there's no gain from, of course, punishing people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would get. And certainly, if people chose to actually embrace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if people had chosen to believe and even be in piety, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically be shakiran alima. That the Lord Almighty would be shakiran alima. What does shakiran alima mean? So shakiran alima, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be the one to basically not necessarily be thankful. All right. Because if we were to look at the word thankful, the word thankful in English, it more has a connotation where somebody is thankful for giving them some kind of a gain, some kind of a fulfillment that they were not capable of giving themselves. But that's not at all what the word shakiran would mean in Lugha Arabiya, at least in the context of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is shakiran to actually mean that He will reward them for the good deed that they had done, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would actually be accepting. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be content, will be accepting whatever good deed, even if it is a small deed, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would actually reward a magnificent reward for whatever good deed the person had done. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is shakir for His servants. So it's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is needing their ibadah or needing their worship, but it is people that actually need that worship. Now I want you to look at this one in where, look at this quote right there. Makhul, just an idea about Makhul. Makhul died 112 Hijriya. He is, of course, a scholar that was not Arabi. In fact, he was an Afghan origin. All right, he was originally from Kabul, an Afghan origin. Finds himself gets sold in slavery, and then later on, he basically is freed, but uses his commitment, uses his basically his love for Islam in order to gain ilm, and he becomes one of the major scholars that passed on that, especially for looking at that era in where it is really close. So just a couple generations after the Prophet ﷺ, because remember he died 112 Hijriya. Let's see. He said, quote, "There are four things, if you have those traits, then they're actually for you. And there are three things that if you were to actually have such traits, that there actually will be coming at you." So the four traits that will be for you, it will be for you to mean that it's a gain for you. It's something that will bring you that good gain. It will be something that brings in the inspiration. It will open doors to good things coming at you. Number one is thankful, being thankful. Two, being faithful. Three, having dua and invocation. Number four is seeking istighfar, or seeking forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the evidence that he basically looked at was really the Quran, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here says, ما يفعل الله بعذابكم إن شكرتم وآمنتم. That Lord Almighty is not in need for your worship, but you are actually in need of His worship. And therefore, if you were to be thankful, if you were to be faithful, so here we go, let's actually put those right there, and where here's the shukr right there, and here's the faith right there, that it's basically coming at you. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala right there, also in Surah Al-Anfal, وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لِيُعَذِّبَهُمْ وَأَنْتَ فِيهِمْ وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ مُعَذِّبَهُم وَهُمْ يَسْتَغْفِرُونَ. So there are certain things, it's you that's actually getting the gain, in where for ad-du'a and al-istighfar. If the person were to actually invoke Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness, that let's say the gain is coming back to them, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells them that if the person were to let's say, stay committed within these four elements, these four items, it will basically give them it will basically give that person that gain for it. Let's continue right there. And when you look at لولا دعاؤكم, so there are certain things in where the person and just doing the dua, that invocation, that they are the ones that will basically bring in all the different blessings, all the different gains, and certainly that those things, they're basically coming at you and you are the one that drew them to you. As for the three elements, in other words, these things, they will basically let's say they will come at you and where they'll basically harm you in different ways. Number one is al-makr, al-baghi, and al-nakth. I want to look at these three items in where if the person were to engage in plot, or if the person was to engage in any form of aggression, or if the person was to engage in any form in where in nakth, where the person himself is the one that is bringing back in where nakth is basically when the person himself basically demolishes and causes a corruption to corrupt and bring a corruption to all the good things that they had already invested. So when you're looking at these things and where, yes, the person might have actually thought that their plot was against the other person, but what the truth of the matter is, وَمَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ. Whatever harm you would commit, it would actually come back to you in the same direction without you realizing. So when you're looking at that part of what is a plot, what is al-makr, what is the plot, is when a person sets out a plan to harm others. In other words, the drive is really to bring about an evil consequence, an evil result to a person, and what they're really seeking is to harm others, that will eventually basically snap at them, and it will really come at them when they thought, it's kind of exactly like man hafar hufratan li akhihi waqa'a fiha. You dig a hole or you dig a ditch for your Muslim brother, then eventually you're really going to be the person falling within that ditch. And that's the same thing. And where if you were to plot for of course, the demise of others, you're going to find yourself that it's coming back to you. Il-baghi. Il-baghi is any form of aggression. So there's a difference between aggression and transgression. Okay, so il-baghi is actually a high level of aggression and transgression. So when you're looking at transgression and aggression, so with that, of course, it's instilling fear and using power in any form of power, whether that was authority, political power, or whether that was wealth, or whether that was social status, or whatever it is, and trying to instill the fear in those that are vulnerable, and in order to gain some personal interest. So that's al-baghi. It's basically abusing certain powers in order to gain some kind of an individual interest. That's al-baghi. And where what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says right there, إِنَّمَا بَغْيُكُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ, that the truth of the matter is that the aggression, that transgression is actually going to come back to and at the person. And at the same time, وَلَا يَحِيقُ الْمَكْرُ السَّيِّئُ إِلَّا بِأَهْلِهِ. All the evil plots will only be affecting the person that had actually woven it, the person that had put it together, the person that had planned all those different plots. They're basically coming back to the person. As for فَمَن نَكَثَ فَإِنَّمَا يَنكُثُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ, right there, whoever would cause any corruption, what they're really corrupting is really corrupting themselves. Now, when you're looking at these four corners or these three corners right there, it's basically to tell us that there are certain, let's call it rules, let's call them patterns, patterns that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in this nature, in this universe, in where you cannot necessarily think that you can go out of this plan. It's a plan, it's a decree, it's a will, it's a pattern that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in this nature. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically informing you of what you may not realize, that whatever action that you probably played out, displayed within this life, you might have thought that it was separated from basically coming back to you or having an effect. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically right there telling you, whether it's right there, whether it's a corruption or whether it's some kind of a transgression or whether it's some kind of a plot, that you are actually thinking that you are in control of how things in this life functions. But the truth of the matter is that you can change the future of your own self, whether that is by being thankful or whether that is by having faith or by istighfar and dua, that will actually change the decree, change your future, change what direction your life is heading towards. That's the same thing. So whether you're changing it towards a positive end or whether you're changing it towards a negative end, it is really within your hand. Therefore, you have to make sure that you're actually directing your future in a way where you're hitting the ball from, whether it's from being thankful or whether it's having faith or making the dua or making istighfar. And that's going to determine, one, rizq, two, successes in different forms, number three, even akhirah, number four, the different things that probably can affect even your health. All of these areas can actually be determined by you yourself and what you had committed. So whether it is makr, baghi, or nakth, at the end of the day, you will find it in your wealth, you will find it on your health, you will find it in even your own psychology, where you will feel, whether it's happiness or whether it's sorrow, anxiety, depression, etc. It is at the end of the day of something that we had harvested. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is redirecting that. What I want you to think about, what if you're going through a situation of sorrow right now, you need to think about, what was it in the past that I had committed that led me to this? What happened? What should I change? At the same time, if you want to change your future, well, you need to invest either in being thankful and recognizing the good things that you have. And that way, it will have an impact on you rather than looking for what is missing, but making use of what you have. And therefore, making use of the moment, making use of those items that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had gifted you with, and using that in order to change your future for many years ahead. Same thing if we're talking about Iman. Iman is going to determine a lot of where and what destination you're heading towards. Same thing with dua. Dua will even change al-qadar. Put in the dua. That's why right now, make the dua every single day, every single minute. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you good health, to give you good wealth, to give you the good, maybe najah or success or whatever it is. Start doing the dua in order to determine your future, to worry about your future and think that, well, I just want to work. I just want to get the money and actually work to get there. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, there are certain things that I want you to invest in, because that is what will determine your success and what will determine your happiness. Be thankful, have faith, continue with your prayers, and of course, with your invocations, and continue with asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. The other part, if you want to make sure that things are not coming to you and at you unexpectedly, don't make a plot an evil plot against anyone. Do not abuse anyone, and simply don't engage in any form of corruption, because it will come at you without you realizing. Let's continue. لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم. That's actually a tricky ayah to do tafsir for, what we're at right now. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us in this ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is really not in need for punishing us, and or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be thankful, and within the meaning that we just mentioned, because it would be really hard to use, all the definition that we had mentioned for a word that we don't really have an equivalent English word for it, at least not that I know of. All right. So let's see right there. After saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is shakiran alima, he'll basically reward us. He'll basically bring in. Why? Because he wanted to tell us, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever good you do, it will come back to you. And whatever evil that you do, well, مَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ, it will come back to you as well. So if you want to invest a good future, well, start from now. Alima, he is aware of what you do, but لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم. I'm going to translate it a wrong translation, and then we're going to correct that translation. لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم وكان الله سميعا عليما. إن تبدوا خيرا أو تخفوه أو تعفوا عن سوء فإن الله كان عفوا قديرا. I'm going to translate it. The Lord Almighty does or dislikes announcing evil from the words unless the person was abused or basically a victim of any form of oppression. And the Lord Almighty is all hearing and all knowing. If you are to reveal the good, or if you were to conceal it, or you were to forgive for any wronghood someone had committed against you, for the Lord Almighty is all forgiving and all capable of doing all the different things. That's a really inaccurate translation right there. So that's why we really need to go for the tafsir and really see, is this really accurate to use this لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم, at least this portion of it. For the Lord Almighty dislikes engaging or announcing evil words unless the person is abused. Well, three things to say. Number one, when we're speaking about لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول, up to here, the Lord Almighty dislikes that people would announce. Al-jahr, the opposite of it, is al-israr or sir. What does that mean? Al-jahr means to announce. Sir means to keep silent. Bisu. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't like that people would announce su. Su is anything that is evil, whether it's evil in terms of harm, or whether it's evil, anything evil, and harmful words, harmful action, that's a su. But here it basically said min al qawl, that all evil words. Why did it emphasize? Is this an emphasis, or is this a general thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like that people would announce evil things? Now here's one thing. When you look at لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء, to announce, there are actually multiple ahadith in where the Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith, كل أمتي معافى. I want to look at this hadith, and like always, I would like you to see the hadith so you could actually see and really get that sense of it and a close sense of it. كل أمتي معافى إلا المجاهرين. Every single one is going to be given basically the dismissal, except that those that would announce sin. And part of sin, in where a person might commit a sin at night and then they would wake up, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really had kept what they had committed as a secret. But then they would announce it and say, I had done such and such yesterday, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already covered it up for him. But then they removed all the covering. And a couple things to say here, in where when we're basically speaking of sin, this is not speaking just about individual sin, but this is also speaking about other sins. Why? Because when you speak of sin, what happens is that it becomes normalized. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there is actually, I believe right there, in where اقضوا على الشر. Now this it's not a hadith, all right, uh, in where when you're looking at to basically remove and eliminate evil, all right, in where eliminating evil by not talking about it, all right. uh, okay, let's see. I want you to look at this one, in where استعينوا, no, not this one, that's not the one that I actually wanted, in where Umar ibn al-Khattab, it was actually Umar ibn al-Khattab, and he had actually said that remove harm by not bringing it up, by not talking about it, by not making it a public thing. Because when you make it public, it becomes normalized. Once it becomes normalized, it becomes something that people do not necessarily have a problem with, because it becomes just something that is accessible, something that is known, something that is common, and it becomes something that everyone it had been introduced to it. So here, لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول, that the Lord Almighty dislikes that people would announce any words of evil. Well, it's not just words of evil, but the question is, any action of evil, any word of evil, we're supposed to basically not announce it. Well, the question is, what is that related to, and how is that related to the ayat that we had done before? Well, remember, the munafiqeen were engaging in all the different types of trying to basically let the mu'mineen not be active in their da'wah, trying to let the mu'mineen, of course, lose their confidence in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and all that behavior right there, in where they were not qawamina bil qist, they were not basically standing up for justice, they were engaging in different forms of rhetorical speeches, in where they were trying to somehow weaken the ummah within. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala right there, in where إِلَّا مَنْ ظُلِمْ, this is a key part within the sentence. So we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't like people announcing evil, but then إِلَّا مَنْ ظُلِمْ is an exceptional word here. What does that mean? The word illa actually means except. Man dhulim, except those that were victims of abuse, victims of oppression. Wait a minute. What does that even mean? So what that means is a couple things. Number one is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala generally, that he dislikes that anybody would announce evil unless you were abused, that you would have the right to seek support in different areas, in different ways, in order to give yourself the support that you need to uproot and simply remove the oppression. But how much of announcing is that permitting? How much can I say? It's so easy for us to actually say, well, I was abused, I was not treated well, I was this, and especially during our times where you usually looking at our own rights and not seeing other people's rights. So it's so easy to claim being a victim. So that's why some scholars, they basically went into differences of opinions of how much of, let's say, of illa man zulim is permitted. The first opinion, they said, well, what they can do, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like announcing evil of words except those that were abused to actually mean, number one, is to actually mean making dua. So, what does that mean? If a person is abused, they wanted to make a dua because they were mistreated, they were abused. So they considered that this ayah is not telling you to go to a judge or a counselor, but this, according to the first opinion, but this is actually saying that no, you're permitted to make the dua against this person and even go far in how you want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to punish these people and I don't know, do different things to them because of the harm that they had done to you. So this would be an exception. That's the first opinion. That this is basically du'a'un fil mudafa'a. Dua in order to uplift and remove the different harms that you're facing. The second opinion in where they said, well, this is not necessarily just an issue of making the dua because having patience is actually better, but this is just a more comprehensive word in where it's telling you, well, you can go far and far if you've been abused to actually go really far in asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to support you and to give you at least your retaliation. C, opinion number two. Opinion number two, they actually went a little, let's say, more specific in where, well, they said, well, no, this is not necessarily to mean that this allows the person that has been or that had been abused to make the dua against the one that abused them, but this is actually talking about that they would have the right to seek support from their abuser in exactly the same way that they abused them in. So let's say this person, all right, needed a judge, needed to call the police, needed to seek support elsewhere, that they would have the right to seek and basically say what oppression they're going through in order to seek help. In other words, who are they really telling? Well, they're telling people that are capable of helping them, whether it's the government, whether it's some rich person, whatever it is. Then in that situation, this is opinion number two, is that this allows them to seek support and seek help. Let's see. Yet Ibn al-Mustanir, he also said, well, what would this would mean? Whoever was oppressed or ukriha ala an yajhara bisu'in min al-qawl from kufr and nahwihi. He actually went into a completely different interpretation. He said, well, no, this is actually speaking about a person that was actually forced لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء, that they were actually forced to say evil things, but then man ظلم to actually mean unless the person was coerced into saying those wrong things. So in other words, somebody puts a bullet or I don't know, pulls the trigger on your head and says, I want you to say, for example, evil things, you know, whatever, bash your parents or whatever it is. And here you're like, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid that I would say such wrong words, such evil things, or maybe perhaps say Jesus is the son of God or I'll shoot. Is this an evil word to say? Well, it's an evil word, but according to Islam, it's an evil word. But illa man zulim. But I was abused. I was here, you know, but my head was actually on the target of a gun bullet. What am I gonna do? and in this, according to Ibn al-Mustanir, is basically referring to that interpretation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like people saying evil things unless the person was dhulim, unless they were coerced to say these evil things, that's an exception. Here's number 3. It's really interesting how he actually looked at it that way. All right, let's continue. And number 4, in where of course, the fourth opinion, they said, well, no, what this means is that a person was not actually treated well, in where if their abuser or whomever had actually not treated them well, in where this is speaking about a specific kind of treatment. What kind of treatment? They said hospitality. Hospitality. Well, so yeah, this is regarding hospitality. If a person, let's say, was invited at a place, but then it didn't serve them anything, etc. They said, well, you know what? To be honest, they didn't really serve me well. They really did not serve me well. I was really abused. I was, etc. That the person is actually complaining in terms of right their hospitality. This one's really rather interesting. All right, and that according to the different scholars and specifically Mujahid, that this is more relating to hospitality, in where for him to say, well, to be honest, they invited me and they basically did not serve me well. In other words, I give them a 1 star. All right. So right there, and where I might actually go to a hotel or go somewhere and I'll say, I'll give them a 1 star. I give them a 2 star. So in other words, kind of like a review type of thing, in where that is permissible to do, to give a review. Okay, to give a review. What if it's an individual and not a public place? So, well, according to this scholar, that review is basically permissible, even if it's a personal, individual thing and not necessarily a public place. So we're not here giving a 1 star or 2 stars for the cleanness, for the timing, for, I guess, the hospitality, or for whatever, how they're serving their guests, or whatever it is for their business. But here, this is actually an individual right there. Can I do that? The same thing in terms of لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول. Should I not say, hey, give a review probably for this restaurant? They didn't serve me well. I saw a fly in my hamburger, and there were some whatever it is in my juice, or all of these different things. Is this a bad thing to say? Am I normalizing? Am I here announcing evil? So according to these scholars, that no, you're not here announcing evil, because this ayah is, according to them, actually telling you that you're permitted to announce this, because it's a way of making sure that others recognize that this will come back at them, and it will actually get them less privileges, because that's a way of a public holding them accountable. It's a society now holding them accountable, and that way they will, let's say, perfect and do a better job in their services to make sure that we're getting the best services, of course, from these public places. Let's continue right there. Yet it is not permissible. All right, let's look at this one. It is not permissible to actually commit something that is a major sin. So let's say a person had actually talked about another guy, all right, that he saw him out with a girl or whatever it is. That's qadhf. What is qadhf? Il-qadhf is basically to accuse somebody that is innocent, or to accuse someone when you don't have any for evidence of committing some form of zina, adultery, or fornication. Then in that situation, does that mean that I could do the same thing to that person because they had actually committed qatf on me? The answer is no. Not because someone abused or oppressed you in a certain way does not actually give you the justification to basically use their principle and commit these types of harms. And it's important to keep that in mind. Well, what if I was abused by a Muslim or a kafir? So for a kafir, all right, The Prophet ﷺ himself, when, let's look at the situation. This situation, of course, Mudar, the Mudar, they basically had, it was during the time of Bi'r Ma'una. What happened was is that they had promised the Prophet ﷺ that they, well, first of all, their chieftain would actually come to the Prophet ﷺ and say, why don't you give us some group of your men to teach those that had recently converted to the religion, so they could come with us in order to teach them the Quran and Islam, etc. But the Prophet ﷺ was not feeling good about this. He was feeling that there was something fishy. But at the end of the day, this guy assured him that they were going to be safe and that there's nothing to worry about. He's going to take care of them and so forth. Now, what happened is that the Prophet ﷺ sent 40 men to this tribe, but then this tribe basically lines up along with 200 men and kills these 40 Sahabi. These 40 Sahaba get killed. One of them does not get killed. One of them actually gets heavily wounded and manages, when a group of Sahaba were passing by, to actually say the truth of what had happened. That's when the Prophet ﷺ had actually made the dua against that tribe. Allahumma shdud wat'ataka ala mudar. And the Prophet ﷺ was making the dua against them. Ya Allah, let your punishment be severe on Mudar, and let their years be years as exactly like the famine that happened during the time of Prophet Yusuf. And he also had made several times du'as against certain individuals for harming Islam or Muslims. So in that situation, we could see that this type of dua is actually permissible in where the Prophet ﷺ, when his Sayyidah Aysha, something was stolen from his Sayyidah Aysha, so Sayyidah Aysha kept on making dua against the person that stole her stuff, and the Prophet ﷺ actually said, وَلَا تُسَبِّخِ عَنْهُ. It's like, you don't even make it easy on this person. You know what? Do and say the dua, of however you actually want that retaliation to happen to them. Now, when you look at the different circumstances there, when we're talking about abusers, okay, I think it's important to mention that there are a number of different circumstances that I'm not here at all justifying abuse. I'm not at all justifying any form of aggression or any form of oppression. But I am saying that when we want to judge, it's important to put a number of different circumstances in place. When you judge someone that is probably 10 years old or 12 years old, it's completely different than when you judge someone that is 40. So to put in the context of age, to put in the context of perhaps what they knew, and to put in the context of what they were probably at the time, I guess, under the influence of certain things, putting it within the context is extremely important in order to know how to judge this all the way. Sometimes we don't necessarily have to have only one side being the abuser. Sometimes we can actually have the victim himself also, depending on the circumstance. Sometimes the victim themselves can also hold some accountability for whatever they're going through. What does that mean? Am I here holding the victims accountable? Sometimes they can be held accountable. So it doesn't necessarily mean a dichotomy where if I'm saying that that abuser is at fault and is definitely going to be at fault for committing X or Y or Z, that it only goes one direction. Sometimes I also need to hold the victim accountable for certain things, allowing the abuser to engage in such abuse. So there are certain things that we have to put within this context in where, look at this one. Let's look at this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, Matlu al-ghaniyi dhulm. Matlu al-ghaniyi dhulm. What does that mean? The procrastination that the rich person engages in paying back their money is a form of oppression. It's a form of abuse. Why? Well, because they've got the money. But if the person was poor and they were procrastinating to pay the money back, that wouldn't necessarily be dhulm. That wouldn't be dhulm, because it wouldn't be oppression, because it was actually beyond their circumstance. That's what I wanted to get to. In where, just as we want to say matlul ghaniyi dhulm, same thing. Can we say matlul faqiri dhulm? The answer is no. But it's the same individual. It's an individual at the end of the day, right? But the circumstances are different. The circumstance in this situation is that this person is actually rich. So if they're procrastinating, it's not that they needed to procrastinate, but they actually just wanted to abuse other people's needs. Other people's needs. Same thing. If we're talking about different circumstances in where definitely what the biggest dhulm and one of the worst dhulm that someone can do is really the part about molestation. This is actually the worst abuse that you could do, especially if it's for children. Why? Because they're most vulnerable and they are most unaware what such behaviors really mean and how it can impact and have an effect on their health, on their mental health, and on and certainly even on their future. So they may not know this. So when we're looking at that, I think it's important to keep in mind that even when we're speaking about such dhulm, I guess right there to actually say لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم. Same thing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes that people would announce suit, except of course إلا من ظلم. This is directly speaking about the person unless you were abused. But the same thing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes that people would announce evil unless we are here trying to eliminate harm, unless here we're trying to eliminate evil. So in that situation, it becomes within the context of education, it becomes within the context of empowerment, and basically helping the victims find the support that they actually need. So keeping that in mind is extremely important, in where when we say لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول إلا من ظلم, based on some of the interpretations in where, well, the only times that you can basically announce some of the evil things that had happened to you is basically when you're seeking support, whether that support meant legal support, or whether that support actually meant financial support, or whether that support actually meant, let's say, clinical therapeutic support. But it's important that we don't fall and put and become so easy in putting in, well, this is therapeutical for me to ventilate and actually talk to my friends about it. Because in that situation, this becomes not necessarily therapeutic in that sense, because that person is not necessarily a specialist to keep such information. One, give you that, say, the treatment as from a professional stance. Number two, that person is not capable of giving you the resources from a professional stance. Number three, such information may become not confidential, but may become all of a sudden normalized in public property. So when we're looking at these areas in where لا يحب الله الجهر بسوء من القول إلا من ظلم, it's basically to learn how to not announce the bad things or not normalize the wrong things. But let's flip the ayah in where what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then like? Well, if you're looking at this ayah saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes that people would announce evil, well, that actually means flip it, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes that people would announce good. What does that mean? Stories of Salihin, story or words of good, words of care, words of kindness, words of, I guess, kind gestures, all of these different things, that those are words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes. So therefore, the Prophet ﷺ actually said, لَيْسَ الْمُؤْمِنْ بِالطَّعَانِ. Let me take you to the hadith. لَيْسَ الْمُؤْمِنْ. I'm going to take you to the hadith so you could actually see it. لَيْسَ الْمُؤْمِنْ. I'm going to show you the hadith right there so you could actually see it. لَيْسَ الْمُؤْمِنْ بِالطَّعَانِ ولا اللعان ولا الفاحش ولا البذيء. Let's look at this hadith right there, in where the Prophet ﷺ actually said that a believer is not ta'an, is not a person that's constantly complaining of things. ولا اللعان is not a person that's constantly damning things. ولا الفاحش, and is not a person that is constantly speaking of things that are supposed to be private and speaking about them and sharing it as a public matter. And ولا البذيء. البذيء is basically a person that speaks of things that are supposed to be, let's say, words that are disclosed, but here this is private things, disgusting things, etc. All these things, this person is sharing it and using it as a word to probably curse, as a word to probably swear, and without them realizing they had actually adopted a behavior. I want you to look at this one because this really involves all the different forms of words, in where constant complaint, constant damning things, constantly speaking about things that, and notice that the focus is really on speech here. The focus is on speech. We usually think of speech, it's not a big deal, but speech actually takes probably 60% of our what is considered of ethics. When you look at Itan, constantly speaking about a person, and we're speaking about them, about their clothes, about their core, whatever that belongs to them, the property, etc. This is Tan, trying to condescend the person, trying to basically consider the person as inferior. Ilan is constantly damning things, where the person is basically taking that moment to every single time when they're basically disgusted of something, angry at something, to damning things, the things around them. So the Prophet ﷺ tells us what a mu'min does not engage in any of such type of speech, any such types of conversations, because of the impact it actually has on the believer. There's no way that a believer can actually engage in such speech because it contradicts what their hearts actually conceal. I want you to focus on that one, because when you're looking at لا يحب الله الجهر بالسوء من القول, this is part of it. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like that people would announce such evil words, إِلَّا مَنْ ظُلِمْ. So if we were to say إِلَّا مَنْ ظُلِمْ there, so does that mean I can actually, because I'm abused, I can swear at the person? I can complain about the person. I could use words to actually somehow condescend the person, speak of the ill things about them, etc., only limited to what is needed in order to give you this necessary support, not necessarily to give you this type of ventilation, but to give you the support in order to stay away.
Can I ask you something? Sorry. Okay, so I know that a lot of people are you know, obviously upset with what's going on with Palestine and these all the oppression in the world, when they see the oppression in different places. So so if it says the hadith, it says don't curse, what you were saying. So basically I'm asking, because I know a lot Arab, they say different things, cursing and names for like the people and stuff. So I'm just, can you explain that? I don't want to repeat the words, you know what I mean? When you're talking about like the oppressors or the group of people who are doing that. Can you explain that? Sorry.
Okay. So, in the situation of a shahada and witness, and which is what is happening right now, in where what we're announcing, for example, in Palestine and what's happening, or in Burma or Myanmar, all these different areas, when we're announcing it, this is a form of witness. It's a form of letting others basically be informed about it in order to do the necessary political pressure to uplift this evil. So
Right,
to
right.
announce
I'm talking
these
about
things.
like the bad words that, like, you know what I mean?
So they're saying bad words about Israel. That's what you're saying?
Well, I mean, like, as a mu'min, should we be like, saying that, you know what I mean? Like the bad words and stuff. That's what I'm
So to
asking.
okay, let me actually take you to I'm going to take you to that point since you opened it up. All right, let's look at this. The Prophet ﷺ, okay, here, let me quote Al-Qurtubi. He said, فَإِن كَانَ كَافِرًا فَأَرْسِلْ لِسَانَكَ وَادْعُ بِمَا شِئْتَ مِنَ الْهَلَكَةِ وَبِكُلِّ دُعَاء كَمَا فَعَلَ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم. I want you to look at this one. In where if the person that is a zalim, that is an oppressor, all right, if he is kafir, then you can actually have your words say and do and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to destruct this person and all the different dua as the Prophet ﷺ had done when the person, this kafir and zalim as well, in where to actually say the words of dua, that's actually permissible. Okay, that's permissible. Here's one thing, is using words of profanity. Maybe you were shy to say that word. Using words of profanity, let's say against Israel or etc. There are certain things that you might actually think that, oh, it's making me feel better to ventilate in using such words, but such ways of ventilation is really empty of an effect. It's just letting you live a self delusion that it is harming Israel or harming that oppressor. But the truth of the matter, you're really harming yourself. You didn't really bring any positive change. You just thought you're living a delusion and thought by me using such words and basically speaking in such manner, using such profanity, that's somehow, hey, giving you superiority. But in reality, you didn't really do anything. What really matters is really action. This action that speaks louder than these words, that's what matters. Now, it's worthy of mention. It's worthy of mention that sometimes, depending on the circumstance, sometimes that giving such words of confidence and resembling words of confidence, that depending on the circumstance, that sometimes it does actually give power I'm not talking about words of profanity here. Okay. But I'm saying sometimes to speak in a way of superiority. That's what I mean. To speak in a way of superiority is important depending on the circumstance. Let me give you an idea. The Prophet ﷺ, when they went for Hajj, there was one Sahabi who was actually walking in a way where he was raising his back, raising his head, and walking in a gait that really contained, let's call it, the highest level of pride, which can easily be called arrogance. But the Prophet ﷺ, because of the context, he said, in such situations in where there are kuffar right there, and this person was trying to display Muslim pride, that was going to show superiority in the situation, the circumstances were really needing this type of confidence, this type of psychological, let's say, empowerment within the Muslim community. So it depends on the situation. It depends on the situation if we're actually trying to feed such feeling of superiority in the context of course, the kafir is probably trying to make you feel inferior, trying to put you down, in where, for example, somebody right there, you're trying to walk down the street and a woman comes to you or a man comes to you and starts saying, hey, take off your hijab, for example. You probably wanted to say something, but then what did they do? They basically wanted to go even farther to probably spit at you. Can I spit back? All right. Should I spit back? Should I fight back? Or should I be like, well, I want to show them that a Muslim can be kind. No, at that circumstance, you're not showing that a Muslim can be kind. That during that circumstance, during that situation, you have not that showed, you're not in the situation of showing the Muslim being kind, but during that circumstances, the message that you're sending is that the person is khana, that the Muslim is nothing but lack of support, that the Muslim is weak, and you're supposed to be in a place of honor. So the circumstance itself is same thing. Somebody is swearing at you, for example, and you find yourself, well, what am I supposed to say right there? Right now, I'm going to start giving them a philosophy class or an aqidah class and tawheed class. No, at that moment, I'm in a situation where I've only got a couple seconds to actually show that I'm in power. Or else, guess what? In the street world and the world of bullying, if you actually show that you are a person of akhlaq at that moment, that's when these bullies will actually take advantage. Does that mean I'm supposed to lose my akhlaq? No, it doesn't mean you're supposed to lose your akhlaq. But at that moment, what you need to express is superiority. What you need to express is power, even if you fake it. Even if you fake power, even if you fake strength, because that's the language that they understand. So when you look at right there, إِلَّا مَنْ ظُلِمْ, in where, even look at this one. Let's look at this right here. الضحاك, Ibn Abbas, Ibn Jubair, Ata ibn Sa'ib. Look at that. They said إِلَّا مَنْ ظُلِمْ in terms of words or even action, in where if that person, all right, فَجْهَرُوا لَهُ بِالسُّوءِ مِنَ الْقَوْلِ فِي مَعْنَى النَّهِي عَنْ فِعْلِهِ وَالتَّوْبِيخِ لَهُ وَالرَّدِّ عَلَيْهِ. Allahu Akbar. What does that mean? He said, well, what that means is that if a person is committing oppression, in where what you could do is really stop them, and التوبيخ له. What is tawbih? التوبيخ, in where look at you. You're التوبيخ literally means, look at this. التوبيخ literally means to use condescending comments to basically let the person feel inferior, let the person lose their confidence. It's a psychological war. So what are you doing? That zalim, the reason why they were bullying, the reason why they were taking advantage of that vulnerable person was really because they had abused their power, abused all of their arrogance, basically displayed really where they had seen their power and exaggerated the other person's weakness. So what are you trying to do? You're actually coming in with a psychological war and trying to, let's say, absorb all this pride in that person and letting them be face to face, putting that mirror right in front of their face and taking away their pride to say no. Words such as, hey, you're stupid, or whatever it is. This is the worst word I could use, okay? All right. And right there, all right, where the person is responding to them in that way, in where لا يحب الله أن يقال لمن تاب من النفاق ألست نافقت, in where the person, let's say the person was a munafiq, all right, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like that. People would actually tell that person, weren't you munafiq, aren't you munafiq, etc. So in that situation, of course, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ تَابُوا. But what if the person is actually a munafiq and displaying straightforward that they're actually part of the munafiqeen? In where in that situation, the person that's actually coming at them and say, well, hey, aren't you the one in where you had actually committed such and such in order to take away all the superiority that they're displaying in order to harm the ummah? Did I answer your question, Noura?
Yeah, you did. Jazakallah khair.
All right. So, of course, what is the evidence on that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the Prophet actually said, خُذُوا عَلَى أَيْدِي سُفَهَائِكُمْ. Let's look at this hadith right there. خُذُوا عَلَى أَيْدِي سُفَهَائِكُمْ. And of course, what does that mean? خُذُوا عَلى أَيْدِي سُفَهَائِكُمْ. خُذُوا عَلى أَيْدِي سُفَهَائِكُمْ, in where those that are displaying السفاهة. What is السفاهة? السفاهة is a form of abuse. Is-safaha is silliness. Is-safaha is basically when someone is displaying unethical moves, in where خُذُوا عَلَى أَيْدِيهِمْ basically prevent them from engaging in such abuse, engaging in such ill talk or ill behavior. What do? Well, we need to make sure that no, we're going to stop them. So using some form of power right there. The Prophet ﷺ also said, "Unsur akhaka zaliman aw madluma." Support your Muslim brother, whether they are abusers or whether they are victims. How is that even the case? Well, the Prophet ﷺ said, if it's a person that is an abuser, if they're basically abusers, then prevent them from abuse. If they're the ones that are victims, we'll give them the support that they need in order to prevent them from being victims. And here, تَكُفُّهُ عَنِ الظُّلْمِ, or تَكُفَّهُ عَنِ الظُّلْمِ. All right, so وَكَانَ اللَّهُ سَمِيعًا عَلِيمًا. For the Lord Almighty is all hearing. Of course, he's all hearing all the different complaints of a person that is probably complaining of the abuse that they're going through. Alima, and he's certainly all aware of all the different aggression and the transgression that they're probably, of course, going through. And to continue into Budu, let's look at this ayah right there. So after telling you, don't announce evil unless you're in a state of being abused, and then it says into Budu khayran, just as he told you don't announce evil, then on the other side he said in tubdu khayra, if you were to announce good or if you were to conceal it, at the end of the day Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold you accountable for it. In other words, he'll basically either reward you or, well, based on the intention that you had done it for, it's basically going to determine whether you will be rewarded for it or not. In tubdu khayran aw tukhfu, if you were to conceal good, or if you were to if you were to reveal good or to conceal it. أو تعفو عن سوء, or if you were to forgive any harm that was done unto you, for the Lord Almighty is عفوا قديرا. The Lord Almighty is عفوا. What is العفو? العفو is basically to dismiss when someone had done anything wrong. So a person commits a wrong thing, and then you basically dismiss that person, you forgive them for it, etc. That's al-afu. Al-qadir is basically the one that is capable of retaliating. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically right there within the sentence, basically telling us, in tubdu khayra, what is best, in where reveal what is good. Of course, it basically put forward revealing what is good is actually better than concealing it. Why? Well, let's look at this. Let's look at this quote. I want you to look at this word. أميت الباطل بالسكوت عنه. Let's look at this. أميت الباطل بالسكوت عنه. Although this is not necessarily a hadith, all right, but it was basically something that was attributed to Umar ibn al-Khattab, that he basically said, well, what you need to eliminate, if you want to eliminate evil, just don't announce it, just don't talk about it. And of course, in that situation, when we're speaking about eliminating what is evil, this is not when we're speaking about, oh, well, let's not talk about all the different things that all these politicians are doing, etc. No, there's some evil right there that you really need to announce in order to bring awareness, in order to make sure that such things are not repeated. All right, that's completely different. This is the only way to hold these people accountable. So this is, sometimes it's actually used in the wrong place, but when we're speaking about right there in where what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us, in tubdu khayra, is basically to announce what is good. Announcing what is good is actually preferable. Why? Because it encourages others to do it. It basically lets people live and feel security. It lets security, brings in peace on the inside and peace on the outside. So in tubdu khayra, revealing it is actually good. أو تخفوه, or if you want to stay silent about whatever good that you had invested. أو تعفو, or you would want to forgive those that had committed any evil thing against you. Well, that would actually right there tell us that فَنَدَبَ إِلَى الْعَفُو, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was recommending that people would dismiss people's aggressions, the abuse. Just move on and just dismiss it. Why? Because the second that you dismiss it is that same second that you would feel good about yourself, that you had gotten stronger and that you had basically went and had become basically beyond the challenge, beyond the trauma. But if you were to constantly feel that I need to retaliate, then you're going to feel that you had not gotten at least on a level of equity, unless that person was dragged to that situation, dragged into somehow getting into something that is equal to the trauma that they had caused you. And once they don't get that similar trauma or retaliation, that you would feel that you are still dishonored. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us right there to feel honored, to feel the empowerment also comes by giving al-afu. That's a stronger empowerment. That when you give afu, when you dismiss that person, it's basically what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself even does as a Lord Almighty, where he would even give afu. That's why part of his name is al-afu, in where he dismisses those that had come asking him for forgiveness. So, in afawta fa inna Allah ya'fu ank. If you were to dismiss, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will dismiss your sins as well. So, فَمَنْ عَفَى وَأَصْلَحَ فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever were to forgive and also aslaha, and they also had. Now, this is important. Afa wa aslaha fa ajruhu ala Allah, and where they also started practicing good. In other words, don't just forgive people like that. They have to show commitment that they're not going to come back to the wrong behavior, that they're not going to abuse you again. Because the second that you would just dismiss and just forgive people, you become an easy target for many that prey on people like you. You got to make sure that you stand your ground in where afa wa aslaha, that the person had also shown shown that they basically had shown resentment. They had shown that they had regret what they had done to you. So don't just forgive just like that. Forgive after the person had shown that they were changing and that they weren't going to come back and abuse you once again. فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Then the reward is really going to be coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's see, here's a question. How can we see another hadith about Amr Ma'ruf Nahy Munkar means to stop oppression from others? Okay, fair enough. So when we're speaking about al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy an munkar, you wouldn't know al-munkar unless it's either announced or you're aware of it. And once you're aware of it, that means you're not somehow spying on someone to know whether they're committing the sin or not. That's not your duty to search for people's sins and I want to see if they're doing something haram. That's not your duty. Okay, unless you're a parent, that's a different story, because if you're a parent, you've got a responsibility to make sure that the person is going in the right direction. You're then in that situation acting like a government. All right. In that situation, you're making sure that this is going towards the right direction. Because as a parent, if this wronghood were to actually go in a different direction, you're also going to pay the price for it. So to make sure that your son or daughter is basically not committing sin is your responsibility. That's your way of surveillance to make sure that everything is going the right direction, because you will be held accountable for your naive parenting by letting a lot of things go, you unaware of it. So in that situation, when we're speaking about amr bil ma'ruf, ordering for what is good, then in that situation, you're basically right there ordering for what is good, in where you are recognizing that you've got a responsibility in where to correct what is wrong. And of course, to nahi anil munkar doesn't mean that you necessarily have to announce it. In nahi an munkar can be in different forms, different ways. Private advice, or it can be sometimes a written advice, can be an advice without the person knowing who I am. Wrote it and sent it a message, an anonymous message, really without me telling them who it's coming from, but just wanted to give them this advice, etc. Or wrote it as a note on their note it on a note and probably put it on their windshield or on their, I don't know, rear mirrors, whatever it is, they could see it on their car. That way that they won't hold any grudge against me, or etc. So that way I can keep it private, I can keep it personal, and I can maintain their honor as well. Because usually people are not wanting to accept any type of advice whenever their own I guess, ego is at target. So they would hesitate. They would refuse that advice because they would feel that they're being dishonored. So they would act in a defense mode. Why defense mode? Because they feel that they have the responsibility to protect their honor, to protect their ego. So they would confuse those areas. The second that you would come at them, they would feel targeted. They would feel that they had become vulnerable. They would feel that you are right now coming at them where they have to act in a defense mode because they feel attacked. That's pretty hard. They would feel attacked, so they would engage in different forms of one ad hominem. So instead of responding to what you're probably saying, they'll engage in what is called ad hominem, and they'll start attacking you personally. So you're trying to correct a certain matter, they'll start attacking you personally. Well, guess what? Remember what that day you did such and such and such, and they'll start attacking you personally. Why? Because they're not giving you an argument right there, but it's a way to basically run away because they're feeling attacked personally. That's why they'll attack you personally in the same way, because they didn't understand the argument. They're not even hearing the argument. When they're not hearing the argument, that's because their ears all of a sudden blocked from listening to the argument, and it's only their ego that is hearing that I'm under attack. Since I'm under attack mode, I must attack back, or else my life is in danger. I'm in danger. My privileges, my status is in danger. So I have to do whatever I can to protect it. So, just to explain this one, I'm so sorry, inshallah. Let's see. You said doing evil will come back at you. Is it similar to karma? Okay. So in Islam, there's no karma. Okay. So karma is in Buddhism because they would consider, of course, that there's some kind of a force in nature, and this force in nature is not God, but it's basically just nature. In Islam, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically the one that controls the force in nature. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the force that controls is the one that controls all the force. Not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is force, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one to control all the force. Okay. He's the one that controls all the different forces, whether it's the force of how he would determine that evil behavior and where it's going and how it's come back to you, or whether the good action and the good deed and how it's going to come back to you as well. So not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is force, but he is basically the one to control the force. What's the difference? So if I were to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is force, that would mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had become in some form of an energy. And if we were to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is some form of an energy basically starts losing power. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not an energy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that created the energy. He is the creator. He's not a creature. Energy is a creature. Force is a creature. Distance is a creature. Time is a creature. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of all such creatures. So that's why if we were to ask, how old is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Well, the question is assuming that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically a creature, and therefore you're asking about age. And same thing. If we were to talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being, of course, a karma, or that nature is karma, then that would actually mean Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is some form of energy. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created energy, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not energy. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond energy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond matter. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond whatever motion or whatever matter brings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator and not creature. He's the creator. So can a female take financial support from an organization for her education even though her family is financially stable? So fair enough. it's whether it's a female or a male, can she take financial support from an organization for her education? So it depends on that organization, in where is it donated, or is it giving her such financial support because of her grades. And in other words, when you apply, of course, there are certain bylaws that such organization would have on who they're going to be giving such scholarships, or such scholarships, whether it's partial or whether it's complete scholarship, or whatever it's financial support. So in that situation, make sure when you apply, make sure that you really disclose the truth about your financial support, because at many times certain organizations, the reason why they're giving financial support is not necessarily in search of people in need, but sometimes it's to actually support certain needs in education that the society needs. So they're trying to support certain fields, encourage certain fields. So make sure when you apply, depending on the organization, all right, when you apply, you really disclose the truth. If they're asking about, let's say, about your financial situation, how much money and who's supporting you financially, all these different things, that make sure you really disclose the truth of the matter. That way you are not taking a donation slash sadaqah when you don't qualify and you're not eligible for it. So if you disclose the truth of your financial status and your family's financial status being the supporters, but they still basically give you that financial support that would actually mean a scholarship, then it's permissible, because every single nonprofit organization, even these nonprofit organizations that fund certain areas of education, it doesn't always mean to fund certain areas of education, certain students, only for the sake of those that don't have the money. Sometimes it's to support education in general, in where it's to direct more students to study and feel that they're capable of continuing and at least fulfilling a certain need within our society. So as long as you're applying and you're disclosing the truth of the matter, then good for you if that organization is basically not funding as a sadaqah, but is funding basically an encouragement and empowerment for a certain field of education. Well, that's really good for you. That's really hard to find, but there are those institutions. I wish that as a Muslim community, I wish that we had that, because I know that the Jewish community has that. And that's what's actually making a lot of Jews find different places of education accessible. It's because those organizations, the Jewish organizations, they are actually funding their own people to make sure that they have students, or they have, let's say, decision makers in the future, and those that are in power, doctors, lawyers, whatever it is, that are actually from the Jewish community, being in certain crucial in certain areas. So let's hope that we would, as a Muslim community, we would basically also understand the importance of supporting the Muslim students to being in such fields. So I hope I answered that question. This is it, inshallah. We will see you all Monday, inshallah. And barakallahu fikum, and Rabbi yahfazkum jami'an.
Jazakallah.
وإياكم. Hold on, I'm trying to find